I can tell you today's topic is going to be not a very pleasant topic. It's about why we failed, right? And it's about what are the mistakes that entrepreneurs make. So, like I mentioned a minute ago, this is the Serial Entrepreneur Club Hour. And we talk about what serial entrepreneurs do over and over again to start, scale, exit, and repeat. And it's not going to be an easy hour. I'm going to open up. I know we have a number of guests who are going to open up. I know that you might be in the audience and you failed at one point in your career, one point in your startup career, you failed to launch your business, or you failed to sell your business, or you failed in some way. And under that failure, we'd like to hear your story. We'd love to hear exactly what happened to you during that time. And I know we don't like to talk about this. This is not an easy show. There are a number of reasons why startups failed. And if you have been following myself on this app or you've been following my career, I've had 6 or 7 very big exits. I've done very well. And so people look at me and say, oh, he's so successful. But what you don't know about me is I've failed multiple times. And we're going to talk a lot about that failure over the next few minutes. I think the number one reason why startups fail is that money runs out. And too many times I've seen good companies falter when money runs out. You could have the best concept, the best people, but if you don't have the money, you don't have the oxygen. It's all about oxygen. One of my coaches, Vern Harnish, would talk about that. It's all about the oxygen. Oxygen. If you don't have the money, I don't care how good your company is. But it's been amazing how many times I see that happen. And I think that's probably the number one reason why startups do fail, is because they just don't have the funding. And I do a number of cohorts with the universities on startups, and I talk to a lot of startups, and I often talk about this concept of a stage gate. How do we actually get to the first stage gate and make certain that we can achieve success? And what is the amount of money that we need to raise to achieve that stage gate? And second, who are the people we need to hire or partner with in order to achieve that stage gate? And more often than not, I see a number of entrepreneurs, they just head out there blindly and just do it, which is great, by the way. I know that actually does work for a lot of entrepreneurs. But if you don't have the money to get to that first stage gate, it's going to be more challenging than if you think about it in advance and think about, what if I actually had the money, and what if I could actually do it and get to that level? And so that's what I would encourage people to think about. And I've seen too many companies fail on this one point, generating enough money to get to their first stage gate. And I'll tell you this, because I'm working with a number of companies, one particular company I'm working with right now, and I'm going to tell you some names today, and I'm also going to avoid telling you some names because I don't want to embarrass anybody in the audience or anybody out there. I work with about 20 companies right now, and one of the companies I'm working with, it seems like the noose is being pulled around their neck. Their interest rates, they're now being charged high interest rates for their loans, and now that they have to raise money, there's going to be massive dilution. So the more you wait, the longer you wait to raise money, the higher the costs. And that's something we all need to think about when it comes to failure. Because ultimately, you're just going to say, screw this, I'm done. It's over. Jeffrey, I know you've had a challenge with one of your companies, and you're very eager to get started here. So I'm going to let you share your story with us, and we're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Colin, and good afternoon, everybody. So my story is a little different. As Colin spoke about, the number one component to startups failing is the lack of oxygen, the lack of cash. And fortunately or unfortunately, my company was a startup back in 2000, had plenty of oxygen. We were very well funded. This company back in 2000 was during the dot-com craze, and we had a very compelling, actually an amazing concept where we provided all the parts and accessories for every product that is in your home. So if you needed an original part or accessory for any appliance, audiovisual product, computer product, no matter what you needed, we were the platform for that. And this company launched, and we partnered with every major retailer in the country. and we were 3 or 4 years into it. At the time, about after 3 or 4 years, we were over 300 employees in New York City and revenues approaching 80 million. I sat on the board and we were working to sell the company. We were in talks with Amazon and a few others. And I recall that the board was getting very frustrated that we weren't growing fast enough. And the thought process was that we needed to change the CEO, to top grade the CEO in order to take us across the finish line. So we embarked on this long search and we found this new CEO. And within 30 days of the CEO in his role, we were out of business. And it was a really, as you can imagine, a very devastating course of events because this company was thriving. This company was in all the trade journals as the darling company of changing the industry and changing how, making it easy for consumers across the world, across the US to be able to source these items they need in an easy and efficient way, and actually be able to go into a Best Buy store and be able to do it the same way in all the major retailers. So we had tremendous momentum. And what happened was, as we also know, everything with startups and in business is all about relationships. And this guy came in like a bull in a china shop, and our largest customer was Best Buy. And we had a bit of a little conflict with Best Buy at the time, and the way in which he approached the executives at Best Buy and the way in which he approached the conflict, essentially Best Buy said, "We're done," and they pulled out, and that was the end of our company after 4 amazing years of growth and tremendous progress and success. And that was our Achilles heel. The CEO, and how he managed the key relationships of the business, completely killed the company.
But how? Like, how did he kill the company? I'm confused.
Yes, Best Buy was about 60% of the business at the time. And as I said, there was a conflict that required very careful navigation and I would say an extreme level of emotional intelligence application to the workings of these negotiations with the executives at Best Buy. And this CEO completely was, I would say, he was desensitized to what we had. An amazing relationship the organization did with Best Buy prior to the CEO taking over. And he just didn't, he thought he was right and that our business, what we were doing was right. And he wasn't going to have, there was no movement and no flexibility in terms of his approach to resolve the issue. And so Best Buy essentially shut us down because they pulled out as a customer. And as soon as they did that, we couldn't sustain with what we had and with the infrastructure that we had, we couldn't sustain the business without Best Buy.
So what you're trying to, what's the real lesson here? The real lesson is that you should have stayed on as CEO. I'm just throwing that out there. That you brought in a CEO, you thought you could get the star CEO, put him in charge of your company, and it just didn't work.
That is correct. We thought we had to start. We had to go get a better CEO and find the top CEO that could take us across the finish line and accelerate our growth and accelerate the sale process. And essentially, it was a complete failure.
It's funny because I often use the word you can never outsource the entrepreneur, right? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can never do that. And we often get nervous. Like we build these companies that are so large, and all of a sudden we're thinking, okay, I've never done this before. Let's bring in an outside CEO. And in this case, it didn't work out. It totally imploded.
I was on the board. I was not the CEO. We had a CEO who was there from the inception and took the company from inception to about 80 million. And the board was getting antsy and saying, we got to grow faster. We got to accelerate quicker. We got to get to 150 million. And so that's what they thought, like you said, they wanted some quote star CEO, which turned out to be a complete fiasco. Yes.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing that you shared that with us, Jeff. I really do appreciate it. I don't know if Michele or Jeff Sass, I don't know where Jeff is. There's Jeff Sass. If Michele or Jeff, you have a question, my co-moderators, or Rachel.
So this all happened very quickly, right, Jeffrey?
It did.
I'm
How
just
quickly? Like, was
curious.
it 6 months, a year?
So I would say from the time we hired that CEO until the time we were out of business, until we shut down, was less than 4 months.
Holy
Wow.
shit.
Yeah.
So I'm just a little bit curious. Was anyone helping him to onboard? I'm just pivoting here for a minute because it's hard to imagine that one person could come in and bring down the company so fast.
You're
Was he
absolutely right.
just like a lone, pardon the pun, a lone wolf left to himself? Or was he not taking the advice of any counsel? Did he seek any counsel? Like, my gosh, this is like
Yes, it's a
earth
great question.
shattering.
You're right. It's a great question. And in fact, if I remember, we had the existing CEO was help him to transition. We also had several on the executive team, but apparently people couldn't work with him. Apparently, I don't remember all the details now because it was quite some time ago, but I do remember that you're right. How could one person do it? But I think he was the front person in this conflict resolution with Best Buy, and he navigated it so poorly. And I think there was a lot of complaints very early on about the CEO, and the board was like, we have to let it play out. We have to let him get his feet wet and establish himself in the role. And perhaps the board also didn't act timely and take a swift enough action and said, let's sit back and let it see how it evolves. And so we
Wow.
can point to that as an issue as well. But yes, it's incredible to think, you're right, that one person could do that to a significant, a substantially large organization, an established organization, even though a very short number of years. But yeah.
What would you do different? And then
Mm,
I'll let Colin go. Like, looking back, like you said, there were some red flags, obviously, right?
yeah.
What do you think should have been done differently?
So actually, and I remember I was flying the flag with the board as well, saying, yes, it's time to upgrade. This guy was great. He got us to where we are. He got us to 80 million. But we need to top grade the position. I remember I was really pushing for that on the board as well. And I think, when I recall, we had several bankers on the board, a few private equity guys, really smart guys that I was on the board with for 3 years. And it was really difficult for me to watch how these smart people in their process of vetting and research, and they were so connected. So to come up with this candidate, I think that was a great learning. That I think we didn't like the candidate initially when we interviewed him. People had concerns about him, but he had an impressive resume, whatever. But there was definitely red flags, and so maybe the learning is that when there are red flags, they should never be ignored and perhaps drilled on and further vetted to make sure that the right decision is being made. Because I think maybe that was a critical learning there, that he never should have been hired, obviously, and how all these smart people could make the wrong decision and such an important pivotal decision for the business and its future was a big learning.
Wow. Yeah. Again, you can never outsource the entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and that's reality. And too many times we stop. Our confidence level gets to a point where this thing's too big, and we're like, okay, let's just see if somebody else can do it better than us. And 4 months later, your company's bankrupt. All right, so I'm gonna lay it out here too. As if you followed me on this show or you followed me on the podcast, you'd know that I've done 6 or 7 exits. Like Jeffrey, you've been very successful.
Thank,
Fortunately, after your this one incident, you've done very well as a serial entrepreneur. I
thank you.
saw
Yeah.
recently you sold a company to a
Yeah.
public company.
Yes.
Yep, and we sold .club to a public company as well, GoDaddy. And those are the good things. And people often look at it and say, oh, Colin, you're so successful. Jeffrey, you're Michele, Jeffrey, Sass, you're so successful. But the reality is there's been some failures there. And I'm going to talk about a couple of them right now. And we're going to brainstorm why they failed. Shareholder blockchain, Jeff. Do you remember that name? I actually still have the website up, by the way, if you want to look at it, shareholderblockchain.com.
Oh wow.
So we set a stage gate up, an MVP, and that was an MVP, a minimum viable product. It had to be reached. I put $50,000 in the company, and one of the programmers went rogue, and we failed to hit our stage gate. Now, at that point, you could say, yeah, I could pivot, or we could focus on doing something differently or do it a different way, or we can shut it down. But I'm very big on Set that stage gate. Set it out 4, 5, 6 months from now. If we don't hit that stage gate, then reevaluate. I reevaluated and shut down the company because, to be quite frank, we really didn't have the secret ingredients to make this company successful. And I don't think they're quite so secret, but people, money, story, and systems. We did not have the right people running it. We had the money, we had the story, I believe, and I think we could have implemented the systems, but really didn't have the people. And once the programmer went rogue, we just decided that this is just not being run correctly, so we decided to shut the company down. Michele or Jeffrey Sass, do you have any thoughts on what happened with shareholder blockchain? I know you saw it happen, you saw the train wreck happen live, and I want to get your opinions on it.
I think you hinted at it. One of the issues is what would you do differently if you were starting over? And I think when you're developing something and you have that stage gate and you have programmers working on it, it goes back to what someone once said to me, inspect what you expect. And I think probably in retrospect, there was not a system in place or a process to stay on top of the work that was being done to see that it was on track and following the goals and objectives of that first stage gate.
No, exactly. Any thoughts, Michele?
Yeah, to further use another pun, there's something to be said about looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right instead of Mr. or Mrs. Right now. Um, Other folks that would have probably been better at running the company and leading it were really busy with, quite candidly, .club at that time. So I really feel like we were in love with the idea and ended up putting the wrong people in place.
So
Now,
was
would
I also guilty of the serial entrepreneur disease, which
I
is
think
chase the shiny, like we already had all these other companies running, and we run an incubator in South Florida, and now I'm all of a sudden I see another one out there. I'm like, oh, we got to grab onto that one too. Was I
right?
doing too much? Was I making Jeffrey Wolf's mistake, which was I wasn't. You can't outsource the entrepreneur. Like,
Yeah, I would say yes. Since you asked the question very directly, I would say definitely it was a great idea. I think I can speak for myself. I thought it was a great idea, but it didn't mean that someone who was maybe qualified to work in it and to be an amazing contributor was the right person to run it, especially at that stage. So I think we have to really stop and
but
think
I'm still
about.
obsessed with the idea. I still
I
love the
love the
idea.
idea.
It's like
Yeah.
Jeffrey Wolf. I love the idea of parts and searching for parts on the internet. To me, that is such a cool idea that you could do that. To me, shareholder blockchain, the concept's good, but yet we just can't seem to put together the people, the money, the story, and the systems to be able to execute a plan to make it happen. And don't get me wrong, of course we could. It's just a matter of focus when you got multiple companies and you're working on it. But maybe one day, you never know. I still, although I know we failed at shareholder blockchain, and I will be the one to admit that we did fail, and that was my responsibility, and I was the one who failed at it for the reasons we talked about. I do believe it's still a great concept, and maybe one day it will come back. Look, let's just go around the stage. I know we have Carl. If, by the way, let's reset the room. Also, if you're in the audience and you've had a failure, like Jeffrey Wolf, like myself, and by the way, every single entrepreneur out there has failed. What was your fail? What was your failure, and what did you learn from it? We're going to go to Carl next.
Hi there, Colin. I've been listening to the thing you said way before Jeffrey came in about money being the oxygen. I'm going to give you a totally different view on it. I've been doing startups basically this June will be 52 years, nothing else, right since I got out of high school. Done it in a variety of different industries, in a variety of different places. Never actually had a job except once where I taught a course at a university on how to do startups, and that was 30 years ago. It's the only paycheck I ever got where I didn't sign it. Money is not the problem. It's management. It's the startup entrepreneur. In the beginning, and this is my put short my great lesson, I would go into a project friendly thing, three, four guys, we all got together and did something, and then I found out the various tensions back and forth. People would say it has to be done this way. I said, all right, I'll go along with it, and it always turned out badly. Turned out my instincts were correct, but I allowed myself to be overruled. Lately, I've become a rather horrid dictator, and it is no longer a democracy. If you do the right things for a project and you put the project first, you take nothing out of the project except when it succeeds, and you manage your affairs so that you stay within the limits of what you can do, you don't run out of money. The people that run out of money they're making a mistake somewhere in their assumptions. I would have asked Jeffrey, for example, here you have a company with $80 million in sales, and 4 months later it's broke. Money couldn't have been the issue. It was something else. There was a series of assumptions. Something was done. Somebody didn't want to do something that needed to be done, or there were conflicts in among the board. Half the people wanted a short term exit, half of them want a long term exit, whatever it all is. It's purity of purpose and persistence and the discipline to make that purity of purpose succeed that almost obviates the need for money. You find the resources, you just do, as long as the project is the prime focus. So, in the put short or put succinctly, it almost is a best as a dictatorship, where one man or one woman, one person, one human being runs the show, and everything goes that way. You have the highest chance of success, and that includes the problem with money. Landed.
I think this idea of a benevolent dictatorship, I'm going to go with benevolent here, Carl. Is that okay? Because I know we don't want to Putin-esque this room,
No,
right?
I'm not
But
talking about you being vicious or inhumane or anything else, but it's purity of purpose with the very good goal of making a project succeed. And by definition, a good project has a strong economic purpose. It makes something 10 times cheaper or 10 times faster or 10 times whatever it is. It has a potential of vast improvement for a great many people. And that's a good project.
yeah, and so let's just bounce this. I told you I was going to do a couple case studies here, personal case studies. And Carl, I hope you'll find this one relevant. You might find it very interesting. And Jeff and Michele, I hope you're ready for this. But I invested in a company. I put $200,000 in a company about 4 years ago. It was an e-commerce company, grew to about $12 million. I will not name the company. I don't want people to be embarrassed by it. But I will talk about the story because I think we can learn from it. Why did this e-commerce company fail? That's the question with Michele and Jeff. They know who I'm talking about because we shared offices together. One of my thoughts, Carl, was that there were too many cooks in the kitchen. You had five partners come, or four partners come together, and then they hired a fifth person to help run the company. And you had too many cooks in the kitchen, and nobody was actually really in charge. So, this idea you can split, eventually, the buck has to stop with somebody. You need someone in the organization to be that CEO, someone to be the executive, or else chaos can rule. And before I go to Jeff and Michele, Carl, any thoughts on that? Because I know you're focused on this benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah, it was. You got to be careful with the buck stops here, unless that person is also given the authority within whatever project you have to make the changes that he or she wants to make. It's not a solution. I've been put into many situations by other people who said, Carl, I'd like you to do this. All right, fine. I'll run it. No, you have to do it my way. And those always disastered. Always. If you're going to put somebody in a position where the buck stops with them, then you have to let him or her make all the moves themselves. They have to be able to run it their way. If you have any chance of success at all, the micromanagement model does not work.
Yeah, that's great. And Jeff and Michele, any thoughts on this e-commerce company, $12 million in revenue, virtually filed for bankruptcy 12 months later? Any thoughts on that, either of you? And I know you saw it happen. I have a few thoughts as well. I want to analyze. I have a few thoughts about the way they did their accounting and other things, but I want to hear from you first before we go on to Peter.
Michelle, go ahead. I'll go next.
Sure. Knowing the situation, but I've seen this happen a lot with younger startups. What do I mean by younger startups? And I'm not saying exclusively this is a situation, but I'm talking about startups where perhaps they did not have experience at prior companies. like really fresh young startups, and probably or maybe did not even have, let's just say, a formal education. Not that's always required.
And also, Michelle, they had early successes. So all of a sudden
Right.
they were greater than everything. I remember once they rented that suite in Vegas where the movie took place, that famous movie where you know what I'm talking about, the one
Yeah,
where they
yeah,
had the
yeah.
lions and it wasn't Leaving Las Vegas. It was that famous movie about whatever.
A bachelor party or
It was like a
something.
bachelor. It was exactly. And these guys were living like rock stars
Right.
because they
But
had
what I
some
was
success.
going to
So they
say,
couldn't make any, but they couldn't make any mistakes. They were
right. And
perfect
so
now.
extremely pompous, forgoing all that. I can strip all that emotion out. They did not understand the fundamental financial economics of the business, and maybe not of any. They just saw this cash pouring in. They did not look at top revenue versus net profit. They didn't look at, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm spending all this money on ads, for example, that's due on a credit card in 30 days. Plus, I have inventory that was on whatever 90-day terms. Like the snowball kept getting bigger and bigger, and in a bad way, because they were actually not profiting. They were just in love with the idea of all this top line revenue flowing in. They had no idea what kind of margins they had. And it deprecates, gets worse and worse from there on.
And
That's
Jeff,
my
we're,
point
we're
of
going to
view.
jump to you, Jeff, but my accountant who looked at this company said they had a major problem. They were doing cash accounting, not accrual accounting. Who would think you need accountants to run a business? Honestly, us startups, half the time we're like, accountants, whatever. The money's coming in, the money's going out. Everything's good. I think you might need those accountants, Michelle. Any last thoughts before we move to Jeff?
Yeah. On the issue of that particular company, Colin, too, I think that they didn't have a plan. Really piggybacking on kind of what Michelle was saying, not just in terms of not knowing the fundamentals of the business, but as far as I could tell as an observer, they were just chasing short-term daily results without any sort of plan, not really chasing. If they found a product that they thought they could sell and the initial results were good, they ordered thousands of them without any sort of plan, no inventory planning, no real business plan behind the brand other than let's just sell stuff.
So you're saying they
That
didn't
was
have
my
goal
impression.
setting? They didn't have goal setting,
Nothing,
daily sales
nothing.
huddles. They didn't have any systems. They just was ad hoc, right?
Correct.
Think about that. Systems. Like that's like we talk about people, money, story, systems. Here's a company that really didn't have systems. They really did have a story, and they really did have people. And I'll tell you why. After that company dissolved, all five of them separated, and each one of them launched multi-million-dollar companies. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable how successful each one of those people were. Not together, but separated. And obviously, they learned a lot of lessons from that particular company. And it's just amazing to see what can happen. $12 million down to zero. Jeffrey Wolf, 80 million down to zero. Shareholder blockchain right out of the block. 4 months later, goes down. Before we jump to you, Peter, I'm gonna tell you about my biggest failure. Okay, and it's never easy. We never talk about failures. We're always talking about successes as entrepreneurs, and it's just really tough to do this. Back in the 90s, 93, we started an ISP. It became the largest in Canada. We took it public. It was a small publicly traded company worth about $80 million. And then we decided to merge that company with a wireless company, a wireless cable company. And then we applied for licenses from the government, and our stock shot up to over billion and a half dollars. And I think Peter Costanza, he's in the audience, he remembers the story. And here we are, I'm 27, 28 years old. I own 13% of this billion-dollar plus company. Me and Mark Cuban, by the way. I'm not saying Mark Cuban was in this company, but he was in another company that happened to invest in a company that I owned. And at the time, he sold his company for about $200 million and managed to get liquidity. What went wrong? Because ultimately, you can see it happening, right? Based on our topic here, but ultimately, this company filed for bankruptcy protection in 2001. And that stock that traded at $16 high, $19 intraday high. I ended up selling for 6 cents a share in 2001. And what's worse is all of the employees who had shares in this company, they lost all their shares as well. Because when we did that trade, or when we sold the company, we did a merger, and our shares were locked up until March of 2021. And what happened was that there was something called the dot-com crash. It was an external event. And I would attribute a large portion of our fall to an external event, to this external event, which more often than not we see happen with startups or companies anywhere in the world. They get hit with external events. Another one of my companies right now in Ukraine has been hit with the war with Russia, right? So these external events happen from time to time. But I think fundamentally, if there's 2 words, 3 words, I'm trying to think of them right now, that I would look back on that, or the lesson that I learned was liquidity over liquidity instead of liquidity or control. I'm making this up as we go. Sorry, guys. Liquidity or control. These are the two things that I believe every entrepreneur wants before they sell their company or when they sell their company. We gave up liquidity. We had no control, and we had sold this company, and our shares were locked up. And this billion-dollar company collapsed down to tens of millions of dollars, and my shares went from $16 down to 6 cents a share, and all of the employees lost all of their money. And I look back on that, and I think my failure was the exit, how I exited the company. The actual company's failure was because of the external events with the dot-com crash, combined with reckless spending. At the time, if you remember the dot-com, we all know Silicon Valley, right? It's not too hard to understand why companies would spend out of control, but our company was no different. And the company was spending out of control and failed to raise additional funding after the dot-com, after the NASDAQ had crashed in 2000. And that led to a whole series of events for many companies. And I look upon that as a failure for multiple reasons. One, the way we exited, but two, reckless spending. Ultimately, we have to look at both sides of that equation. We have to look at the revenue that's coming in, and we have to look at the expenditures. And we have to think about, just because it's trendy right now, for at the time was eyeballs, that's what we called them, eyeballs. Just because it was trendy to get eyeballs with no revenue doesn't mean that's going to last forever. All right, Peter, you've been very patient. We've put ourselves out there. And by the way, if you're in the audience and you want to share a story like that, you want to come on stage, you want to drop trout, whatever you call it, come on stage. It's open mic today. We're all talking about how we failed so that hopefully we can learn something. Peter, what would you like to share with us? Peter, microphone, left corner. And if Peter, you're going to find some time to get to that microphone. Ryan. Ryan? How do you pronounce your name, Ryan? Reyn.
Okay, can
Got
you
me.
hear me?
Can you hear? Yeah, I got you
Yeah,
now.
Peter, we're going to go to you next, okay?
Okay.
What's up, everybody? My name's Rain Wakefield, aka Philip Joseph Rustine III at birth. I love the room. I love everyone's ad. Colin, well, thank you for putting together this room. I'm super attracted to this based on my now 2 decades of work. I inadvertently fell into becoming a business consultant through my design career. And it was a lot of right time, right place. Back in around 2001, my neighbor invited me into a little office space of about 2,000 maybe square feet of cubicles, and he's, oh, this is what I do. It's like a kibbutz, but for like cubicles. And I said, oh, that's not your marketing. I'm not sold. And he goes, what would you call it? And I looked around the little space, and I said, we need to nix the word cubicle. No one wants to work in a cubicle. So what if we called them workstations? And you're not doing office space, you're doing community co-working. And without me really realizing it, in 2001, I would change a whole industry and create a language set. And within the first year of working together, I would rebrand them and give them a whole facelift and a mission statement, and did everything from their logo to their business cards to their interior architecture and interior design to their website. And within the first year, they were able to grow from 2,000 square feet to 80,000 square feet. The year after that, we more than tripled, and by the third year, at the end of that third year, we were closing a deal with Bloomberg, and we doubled our square footage and had a total of around almost 600,000 square feet by year 4. And interestingly enough, we would host a lot of founders that would go on to create other very notable community co-working spaces, some of which there's some movies about them now. And so I had inadvertently placed myself in a position where I was surrounded by startups, and I had created all the communications and marketing and the physical spaces that all these businesses wanted to be in. And so I built an agency without ever really planning on it or thinking on it, and it just happened because I learned some really great values from my father, who was a farmer, and you could never say no to the moment. You always had to somehow get through. So I just kept saying yes, knowing I'm in New York. If I don't have the skill, I can learn it quickly, and if I can't learn it, I can hire someone that knows it. And so I built and built. And along that time, I worked with over 150 companies, mostly startups, some Fortune 500s, but mostly startups. And one thing I was realizing was a lot of the entrepreneurs were just interested on a couple things. And I think maybe Carl had mentioned it with the benevolent dictator kind of notion. He said if we can make it 10 times cheaper or 10 times faster, then it's good. And I would argue that point because I think this is not the full picture of the metrics we need to be measuring for our success. And in 2001, for some reason, I came up with this quadruple bottom line, which was mostly based on my experience in indigenous medicine work, which if you've ever been in those types of environments and circles, you open a circle based on the 4 directions. And back in 1999, when I started doing that medicine plant-based work, I realized very interestingly that we're in such a binary. And I think this is a major issue that entrepreneurs have, is that they're in a binary system. Good, bad, wrong, yes, no, success, failure. And there's very little middle ground. And I thought these metrics of measuring our environment and navigating is really insufficient because 2 points of reference really gives us a one-dimensional sort of figure if you're talking about geometry. And I thought, if we're in 3D and you are required at least 4 points of relativity to have a 3-dimensional time-space construct, shouldn't we be using 4 points of reference to measure all of our decisions, whether in business, personal, spiritual? So I brought a lot of my spiritual experience into the business world and created in 2001 something I called People, Planet, Prana, Profit, and started bringing this quadruple bottom line into my businesses that I was working with, and oddly became somewhat of a shamanic, if I can, business developer, where I would bring the entrepreneur through the depths of themselves, asking the deep questions, because it's very obvious, I think we could all agree in the room, businesses end up failing because of our own idiosyncrasies that we bring into those businesses as humans.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Often the entrepreneur gets in their own way of scaling,
Yeah.
and more often than not. So they come out with this brilliant, genius concept. It takes off, and then they get in the way. Like they're their worst enemy. They're
Yeah.
their worst competitor. It's themselves. Why
Yeah.
is that?
Yeah, I see that all the time. And I try to guide the entrepreneurs I work with into this balanced center point by measuring things on the 4 points. Yeah, if we're only worried about the bottom line, then fuck, we can step over anyone's head, just walk over anyone's bones because we're just measuring the bottom line. That's all that matters. But I started realizing that I could educate these entrepreneurs and teach them just greater values from a spiritual side. And I think I'm hearing some stories like there was a great story where this team of 4 and 5 people came together. They had this huge failure together, but individually went on to have successes. I would say even that failure was part of the success, because if they hadn't come together, maybe they wouldn't have learned those lessons that enabled them to go on and have those great successes as individuals. So I just feel our metrics and how we're measuring success is very limited. Society is not caught up yet. Our judicial system is still too much in the binary, and we're mostly making our decisions based on the financial bottom line. And I like to look at helping businesses build a culture of change where when people show up to work, their life is enriched, not just by the check they make, but by the experiences they're having in the workplace. So I've brought in meditation spaces, breath work, different types of exercises into the various businesses I've worked with because I realized if the people are not fit, if the people are not mentally sound, if the people are not, spiritually sound, if there's something going on in their home life and they can't figure out how to get around it, then that's ultimately going to impact the business. And so I like to look at a business as something that's going to benefit all the stakeholders, even the people that are not coming into the office, that are connected to these individuals' lives. Now, I've had a lot of resistance to this type of approach, specifically because that old, tired, clanging, banging, single bottom line thing is really present for a lot of entrepreneurs. But the entrepreneurs that I was able to educate on these things, they've created such vibrant businesses, such vibrant workspaces. I've seen complete life transformations happen with this type of work. And I think it's possible, and not only possible, I think it's necessary for us to have a thriving society where we're healthier, happier, more abundant, and we begin to measure the success even of a nation beyond the GDP. What's the gross national happiness quotient and things like that.
I like the
So,
way you're reframing this failure. It's not necessarily a failure. It could be a learning event. I've failed so many times. That's really sharpened my sword. I've really become a better entrepreneur. And it's not, a failure is not just a failure. It's something else.
yeah, it totally is. And I think that's, again, our language is so challenging, right? Because it's so binary. It's a failure or a success. Like, what's the middle? I'm always challenging, especially in a communications round. Like, it's very easy to say, hey, my product's the best, my competitors suck. And it's very easy to just say that. And I've always, I've despised this idea of creating a perceived value. And this is where the quadruple bottom line for me came in. I said, what if we actually create moral, ethical, principled, systemic value, actual value, and then we just talk about it. We let that true value be perceived rather than racing ahead, saying the words that need to be said to garner attention and to get market share. What if we stepped back for a moment and took time to really think what is the not just and beyond sustainable, what's the regenerative solutions? What are the solutions that I'm doing that go beyond cradle to grave, but break the death birth cycle itself? How do we create regeneration with everything we do? And that takes some out of box thinking. And one of my greatest case studies was with my family farm. I was able to grow and expand in New York City for many years, and I came back to the family farm and realized that my father had inadvertently, one foot in front of the other, created the largest producing flower farm in the United States. And in fact, if any of you brought flowers for your beloved or to say sorry or for anything else, my father probably grew that while he was alive. And when I came back to the farm, I noticed that my dad had his hands full. The whole entire operation on, at the time, 350 acres was all in his head. There were no systems. He led by sheer will of force. He was the first man on the field, the last man to leave. And he had created something so unbelievable. And when I started to dig in there, I was realized, shit, I'm in an unbelievable industry for agriculture. The fresh cut flower industry is the most wasteful when it comes to any type of agriculture in the United States. And on top of that, a lot of the money was going back to Monsanto, which was my main goal, was to stop that immediately. And so I started to dig in, realizing all of our outsourced material was money going to China, things that were not coming from recycled content. And I made a challenge to myself. I said, I'm going to bring all of this into the tri-state area. We were mostly in New Jersey and also Virginia farming. I'm going to bring this all into the tri-state area. I'm going to make it cheaper. I'm going to make it more efficient, more sustainable, and I'm going to change my industry. And so what I did was I created a series of benchmarks, behavioral patterns of the most maximum operating vendors using 100% post-consumer material, no raw materials, no sourcing new raw materials from the environment, using 100% alternative energies, and the benchmarks went on.
Hey,
So
Ryan, I got to get you back on. I got to get you back on. I think on a
yeah,
different show, a different
yeah,
topic. A fellow
yeah, man,
farmer here, fellow farmer. My family's been in the farming industry for since 1935, and I just
amazing.
this last year bought my family farm. That's I don't know if that's the right terminology, but we bought the family farm from my uncles who had passed away, and we're now doing Christmas trees and pumpkins, and
Oh,
not flowers. But in any case, I do. We have 7 minutes left, and we got Peter, Jeff, and Betsy. I do want to get them on here as well, but would
of
love to
course.
have you back because you're a wealth of wisdom and really just I never met you on Clubhouse before, and I'm just excited. I'm following you right now, just so you know.
Cool.
Loved it.
Likewise. And hey, thanks for having me on here. I'd love to join your rooms again because it's all about us sharing this information because that's how we all get home to a better place. Again,
Absolutely.
my name's Rain, aka Philip Joseph. I really appreciate it. I'm past the mic now.
Yeah, and that's what makes Startup Club so special. It's a community, people like yourself who come on and just give that kind of information. Peter, what are you going to tell? You going to share a story?
I am. Being in tech, Colin, I think you and I have seen, especially with some of the, I guess, the companies that we saw, the company that we had sold to, how they bought them and destroyed them and ultimately failed. But this one's personal.
Okay,
And
so what you're saying is that sometimes companies they sell, like entrepreneurs sell their companies,
yeah,
and the company that buys them destroys them.
absolutely.
Yep, seen that too many times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anyways, I'm not going to focus on that. I can come back and talk days about what I've seen. But this one's personal. And i- we've, as entrepreneurs, we fall in love with the idea. And yeah, sometimes we make mistakes and it's just not the right idea or the right time. And I'm going to give you an example. I was in AI for a period of about 5 years ago. And I met this one guy who everybody in the AI community was talking about how smart he is and what he's building is going to revolutionize law and the way lawyers work, et cetera, et cetera. And he had built this model. Ultimately, what the product is, lawyers, they've got so much documentation when they take on a case that they need to go through that most of the time they just need to know the specifics. And he had built an AI model that was able to take thousands of pages and properly summarize it down into you'd actually pick how many pages you wanted. It was neat. I saw it working. It was cool. It sounded great. Like it's a time saver and everything. It's just it worked and it worked well. The guy, the founder and the CEO was ultra passionate. Like it had all the right check marks. And I ended up putting in a little bit of money into it. And I sat on the board. And the one thing that I couldn't believe that I didn't see this more was this entrepreneur who had gone out and raised close to $30 million. AI VCs were throwing money at any AI idea back then. Guy had raised $30 million and building this whole thing out, but not one of us, not the VCs, not me, not even him, actually s- caught on to the fact that the way lawyers make their money is billable hours. If they can't spend as much time reading the documents, they don't want the tech. They don't even want to get near it because, and I remember, I was talking to a bunch of lawyers myself, trying to convince them to buy it or to even try it, be a beta user. And they all said, look, you know what? This is going to sound horrible, but the more documents that get thrown my way, the more time I bill. And unfortunately, that is the truth. So he tried
That
to
short term thinking. The fact of the matter is, these paradigm shifts, these regulatory changes, these technology shifts, these trends happen all the time. And
yes,
we think that we don't have to, we can keep doing the billable hours until somebody comes out with a platform. It reminds me of when I was back in 1993 when we had a BBS, and people in the BBS community, I couldn't believe this. People thought this was it, and they weren't going to change. BBS was a way of connecting to each other, but not the internet. And we saw the internet, we put all of our money in the internet and shut the BBS down. And the people who were stuck with the BBS, they got stuck with that, and they ended up going bankrupt in 95, 96, 97. And the same thing happened in 99 with the dial-up internet. And the same thing happened, it's going to happen over and over again in history, that the ones that try to hold on to these old platforms, yeah, in the short term it works, but in the long term,
I agree.
you're going to get smoked.
I agree. I completely agree. As I said when I started off, sometimes it's just the wrong timing. You may be ahead of your time. Like I said, the tech was great and we all loved it. We thought this was going to revolutionize. Here we are 5 years later, and I've got a couple of friends who are lawyers, and I'm still asking them, are you guys implementing anything to help you summarize? I don't know. But I agree with you, Colin. Like, it's going to change at a certain
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
But
That's the Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm. That AI you talk about is in a chasm. And we had Jeffrey Moore on this show, and you can catch him on www.startup.club and check out his session. It was really phenomenal. Peter, I'm going to throw one other one out, and we're going to go over time here because Jeff and Betsy, we're not going to forget you, okay? We will never forget you. We are going to go overtime here. I was working on something with you in 1997, 1996 called My Yellow Button. Why did it
yep.
fail? Why did it fail?
I continue to scratch my
Okay,
head
what is
around
it?
that
We have
one.
to tell people
We
what it is first.
So my yellow button was Colin and I would be out in the road growing the company and meeting. We'd be sometimes real remote places, and we'd need a ride after the meeting. And we'd always have to try to hunt down and find the secretary to call us a cab because we had no idea. Back then, even mobile phones, like, you didn't have the internet. We had the flip phones, right? So, what's the phone number to a taxi company, et cetera, et cetera. And as soon as the first, iPhones came out, first thing, we thought about was, oh my God, can you imagine? You've got GPS now. You can just push a button. It'll call the yellow, basically, we called it the yellow button, but it'll call you a cab, and it knows exactly where you are, and that cab will come to you. And it's very similar to an Uber, but we were thinking more cabs. Colin, I don't know. Like, I think we were just so distracted, to be quite frank. We had a lot on the go at the time. I think if we really got serious about it, put some serious money behind it, who knows where it could have gone. Uber guys were working on it as
Well,
well. And
it was 3 to 4 years before Uber, and
yeah,
the
yeah,
number one reason this idea failed was because we failed to take action.
that's right. Yeah,
Sometimes you can have a great idea, but you just simply fail to take action,
yeah,
and that was one of them.
yeah, I agree. I
All
agree.
right, Jeff, we want to jump to Jeff. I know we're going overtime here. So Jeff, you're on. You're on.
Oh, hey, thanks, Colin. One of the things, listening to you guys, one thing I think would be really important to know for people is, I think what you said and what Carl said earlier is the people that you work in a team with. One of the most important things to know is people's talent levels at the level at which you want to build your business. And if you had the ability actually to know what talents people bring to the table when you had 4 or 5 people with the same talent levels or same talent areas, then you're missing some talents in the business building areas. And not just talent as far as being able to be a programmer. I'm talking about talent as far as business building talents. Now, if you had a tool of which you can actually look at those talents and say, hey, Colin's talents are more geared to rainmaking, and then Peter's more into the conducting of people and looking at people,
Oh,
and
you
then you
figured
guys
this
can.
out, didn't you? You figured this out.
It's already out there. It actually is already out there, to be honest. So it's a tool actually Gallup actually initiated and built, and they actually use it, and you can actually identify where your talent levels are, and then how then you build your team. You actually take those talents and put them together, and the talents you're missing actually when you're talking about. Yes, please. When you see the actual talents out of alignment, you actually see that's where the businesses actually end up having the most troubles. Is when you see the personnel issue is the person who's over personnel isn't somebody who thinks of personnel all the time. They may be just actually selling the product and services. So that's actually when you start like peeling it apart. You actually see the talent missing is actually where it falls apart. So if you can address the 10 areas of business that they've shown, address at a high level, you see the business actually being successful.
I think you're onto something here. That if you have a team and you missing one component. Like we talked about that one e-commerce company, $12 million e-commerce company that came down because they didn't do accrual accounting versus cash accounting. They missed the accountant. If you don't have the accountant, if you don't have the CTO, if you don't have the operator, if you don't have that particular individual in your talented group, just that one missing piece can take you down. Is that where you're going with this?
Absolutely, absolutely. You can if you can have the best idea. I say this to people all the time. Just because you have the best idea, if you can't get people on board with it, if you couldn't lead people out of a burning building, how in the world are you going to get people to fund your idea? It doesn't matter if you've invented Google. It doesn't matter if you've invented YouTube. If you can't get people to see the idea itself, they're not going to invest in it. It doesn't matter how great it is. So you may not need to be the person who's actually pitching it in those meetings. You need to find somebody who's your pitch person. That's the most important person for your team, and you don't have them. That's why your business isn't going anywhere. And now you're stuck and you're talking about funding. You don't have funding. So now you're right. You're out of money. There is no money. And now you don't have YouTube, and somebody else now starts it because they have the missing personnel, the missing pieces you don't have, or actually have them in their team. And now they get the idea off the ground and running, and now you're short-handed, and now you're looking at what you think you did wrong, and the fact is you didn't have the right people on your team.
Yeah, exactly. That's amazing. I think you hit it dead on. I know we're running low on time. Betsy, we're on fumes. Come in for the close.
Thank you. I'm sorry you're on fumes because I have a big challenge,
It's
but I'll
okay.
try to
Go
keep it
for it.
really
Go for it.
brief.
We're going to stick around. For you,
Okay.
we're going to stick around.
Thank you. And it will pay off, I think, because my vision will impact everybody if I can realize it, and I need help to realize it. So, very quickly, my failure story led to a current attempt at a startup. I was ahead of the curve when I left my job at CBS Radio to start doing environmental news programs and news and views you can use. And that was, I thought, once people understood our planetary pickle, they'll certainly get active and be part of the solution. Ahead of the curve. Right now, though, everyone is finally aware that we cannot ignore climate change and extinction and ocean acidification, et cetera. So, a group of us, mostly journalists and environmentalists, no business people in the group, but there are about 10 of us volunteering. We've decided what I failed at was pitching the news networks content on eco solutions, and they just were afraid and still are. They're doing a little bit, but not nearly enough. There's so much out there to cover challenges and solutions. So, we decided to start greentv.com. It's an online platform. I do interviews with the solutionaries, but of course, we want to grow to be our own channel, whether that's a cable channel, if cable is still worth it by the time we get there. And we just don't know how we can get a business person in there to help guide us. But what we have is a marketplace where there is zero supply. There's huge demand. Our programming is only for those who eat, breathe, or drink. Haha, but it's true. And we're supposed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by half in 8 years, but nobody's talking about how to do that. So, in a nutshell, that's our challenge. But we have so many great ideas. We just and there's so many reasons not to do a startup and not to try to do a television channel or network. But there's so many more reasons I think to at least try. But I don't want to fail. I want to succeed because if I succeed, your kids will be better off. Thank you.
I love the story, and everyone here on the panel, hopefully we can help her here. I know one thing is that, or four things. Every company needs people, money, story, and systems. You have the story. It sounds like you have the people like to do this. So is it about raising money? Is that the issue, Betsy?
Yes, it is. And we first need money to hire someone to, unless you can tell me how I can do it without funds, to hire someone to run the business, to grow the business. We have tremendous deep talent in terms of environmental experience and some media, but nothing like television network level. What we don't have is someone to help us figure out how to raise money and how to get from here to there without, we don't have any money. But I just got a big idea yesterday, just very quickly, just to tell you how my mind works. The Black News service or Black News Channel just went out of business. They had $50 million, and they started 2 years ago with a great concept. Let's do news about and for blacks and other people of color. They somehow just went bankrupt, and I'm thinking, gee, they've got a lot of equipment there. We could use some of that equipment. How can we see if they're having a fire sale on that and grow Green TV quickly? But how do I even begin to figure that out? So those are the kinds of things that come up every day, that if we had more personnel that could help with that side of it, not just creating content and doing interviews, then we might get somewhere. We have to leapfrog. We don't have time to grow slowly. The planet doesn't have time to grow slowly. The climate doesn't.
Great. If we have anyone on stage, Ryan, Jeff, Peter, Jeffrey, Michelle, who want to throw some ideas out here, that would be great. For me, I do a lot of investing in companies. I always look for a proven concept, and I think sometimes it's a step function. I know you want to leapfrog and jump into it, but I also wonder if you need to establish a certain level of success, whether it's a local market, whether it's somewhere you can establish and show success to
Mm.
potential investors, because investors are thinking about accelerant. They want to be able to throw money at you, Betsy, and make more money, but they need to know, they need to have the confidence that you've proven your formula in advance. Because
And I have.
investors hate investing in formulas. What we want to
Actually,
do is we want to throw money at you. And so let's just say you're number one in New York for the green television, dot, dot. You own just New York, or you own just Miami, or you own just San Diego. You
mhm.
own that particular city. So how are you going to go to 10 cities, and how are you going to go to 10 countries? Those are the two questions that investors want to ask.
That's a good question. And I just want to say that I do have a proven track record because when my show was on Air America, a former liberal radio network many years ago, I had 40,000 listeners a night, and it went from weekly to daily because it worked. And people are hungry for this kind of information, inspiration. So I think that's one way to show it. 1,500 radio shows on my website, betsyrosenberg.com. But what we need really is a mentor. So if there's anyone in this room that would be interested in help guiding us. And again, local works, but it goes slowly, and I don't have time. And
Yeah.
like I said, the environment doesn't have
Well,
time to
we're
take
doing a
ideas.
show, Betsy. We're doing a show, and I know I have to close the show down, but we're doing a show. Rachel, if you can give us the date. We do the Serial Entrepreneur every Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern, and we're running a green show, and we have two pretty high level people coming in. I'd really like you to join that show. I don't know
Wow.
if Rachel, you're available to answer the date there.
Yeah, of
Do you have
course
the
I
date?
am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our Green Startups is on April 15th with Edna Bibb and Dickie Armour.
That's awesome.
I
So
would
we'd love
love
for
to
you to
be part of
join
that.
that show. It's a conversation. I think what you're doing here by interacting on Clubhouse is a first step, and I think you're going to find answers. Maybe not all your answers, but at least you're digging in. It's better than sitting at home and doing nothing, and getting in there and figuring it out. That's the way it is. This has been an incredible outbit. Thank you very much, Betsy. I've been
Thank you.
overtime way too long on this show and podcast. And I don't know if you know this, but we put this show out onto a podcast network. You can now listen to this show on Spotify, on Apple, on Amazon. It's called the Serial Entrepreneur Club Hour. We have 52 or 53 shows now. I tell you, you listen to this, you'll get an MBA in entrepreneurship. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your stories. Rachel, I think we have to book in in 3, 4 months from now. We have to do this topic again. I think we barely scratched the surface. I think there's a lot of stories that we can learn because Bavin Turkai last 2 weeks ago told us the number one thing, and he's a multi-unicorn. The number one thing that these shows and whatnot, they never talk about the failures. They never talk about what could go wrong. And I believe that we can learn a lot from what can go wrong. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a great show, and you saw the power of the Clubhouse startup community. Talk to you later. Bye for now.